Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Art of Communicating Data show. I am your host, Hannah. And today we have a guest, Paula Lago. We actually had scheduled this interview for end of last year, and I and my family got sick. So Paula was very gracious enough to reschedule this. But I'm really excited because we're going to be talking about creating charts for social impact and how we can use it for advocating change. And I know a lot of folks are interested in this. So I'm really excited to go into this. Just a little bit about Paula. She is a data storyteller, data communicator. She is a data visualization and communication expert based in Uruguay and has over 8 years of experience. Is that right?
Yes.
And I'm really excited because the work I've seen some of the work you do for the European Correspondent, and it's amazing. And the projects that you work on as well, your personal projects, I think they're very inspiring. So you're applying your expertise, your skills, and your love for data to create these visualizations that are engaging people and informing people about pressing social issues, which is a huge challenge and an amazing feat to be able to accomplish. So I'm really excited to get into that today. For those who are new to this topic, though, and can you tell the listeners a little bit about what anthropographic data visualization is?
Mhm. Okay, hello everybody. I'm really excited to be here as well. Anthropographics is, I think it was a term first coined by Enrico Bertini, and he refers to this kind of visualizations are um, that are specifically referring to people and that in some way visualize some aspects of their personas. So in the visualization that I built specifically, I was visualizing educational trajectories. And in that visualization, I coded attributes such as what grade they were taking in a given year, how many years it took specific people to finish high school, how many courses they were taking, if they had dropped out early, and it kind of gives a visual footprint of the person.
I want to talk a little bit more about this project, but because I think it's called Paths in Education, right? But
Yes.
before I do that, another question I had before we get into this topic was, what inspired you to start doing this work, combining data visualization and these human interest stories?
Hmm. Right. So I knew this was a huge topic in my home country, in Uruguay, specifically dealing with dropouts in high school. I thought personally that it was an overly discussed topic, but I felt like there was something that was missing. And this is 100% a personal opinion, but I thought that there was in knowing these figures. And yes, it's true that 50% of young population don't finish mandatory schooling. But at the same time, I felt like a lot of maybe more educated people didn't know who are these people, why did they drop out, what are their lives like, what do they do once they drop out. So I felt like there was um, something missing in the storytelling of this issue, and so I wanted to address this, and that's how I got inspired to do a story that combines, yes, the statistics and the more classic data visualization, but also the personal stories.
I like how you started off by saying like this is a topic that sounds like is just something that's a the people just know about. They just have accepted it's like a normal thing that's part of their society. But you thought there was something missing, and a way to have people look at this with fresh eyes and a perspective, like a different perspective that they may not have looked at, is really interesting. And I'm sure it could inspire people to do the same with their work. I'm curious if you noticed that there was any, like, what kind of feedback you received from people who did look at the work that you did in Paths in Education, and, yeah, just how was it received by your audience and what feedback you got from them?
Yeah. So it's interesting because it's kind of similar to what you were just saying about how they had never seen the problem through this lens, through this different perspective. So I was glad I was adding something new to this discussion, in a more personal perspective through which audiences can empathize from another place. So that was kind of the feedback that I got, that it was very clear, that it was a different, a more novel perspective, um, and that it was em- emotional in a sense for them. So yeah, and that was kind of my aim. So I'm glad it was received in that way.
Yeah. Do you have any thoughts or tips about balancing this emotional element of this kind of storytelling with, the hard facts of data and stats?
Hmm. Yeah. So I think it's important to. I mean, I knew I wanted to tell these personal stories, but at the same time, I knew I had to give a broader context of what this problem looks like at a country level. So I tried to really dig deep into the problem, see what were the causes behind it, and give a thorough view of this. Um, it might be, I reckon, that the whole narrative from start to finish is a little long. I acknowledge that. Um, but I think it strikes a good balance. And also, I give a perspective of 8 different personal stories um, that face different challenges. So yeah, I think it's good to kind of get a feel of how it's looking. Also, if you can get feedback from readers, and yeah, and for the personal stories, I would say um, to be a good listener and to get a feel of. For me, it was really important that the stories were something that would make those people proud of how they were being portrayed. Um, so get a feel of how you should present these people in the best light, or at least that was my aim. And yes, and try to present it in that way.
Yeah, I appreciate that you mentioned about being involved with the people you do decide to, highlight their stories in your work and to get their consent and feedback and make sure that they're happy with how they're represented, because, we are taking their stories and, maybe not always using their exact words, but putting them in this context and making sure that we are not, that we are doing justice to their stories and experiences. um, for people who may be curious about starting to do this, like, do you have any tips on how you personally decide which human narratives to include in your data projects, and how people can maybe learn from that too?
Yeah, sure. Um, so this was challenging for me, a challenging part of this project. Firstly, I thought I would include both the stories of people who had a timely trajectory and people who didn't have. Then I decided that I would stick to the people who hadn't had a timely trajectory, because those were the people who had faced the most hardship. Um, so that was one of the things that I tackled first. And then the recruitment process was a bit challenging. At first, I thought I would do more like a head hunting kind of approach. But then I didn't know enough people in that situation, because I also wanted to do it with young people who had been in high school very recently or in the present. Um, so what I ended up doing was recruiting through social media and getting acquaintances and some organizations to promote this on social media. And I had a form where people could put basically their age and if they had repeated a year on high school, and if they had dropped out. And then I saw which people gathered the necessary criteria to be a part of the study, and I contacted them. But it was a bit challenging. I had about 20 people signing up, and then I had 8 people who gathered all the criteria, and that's whom I got in touch with. So in this case, it was people who volunteered to be a part of the project.
That's interesting. Yeah, I can imagine the challenge of actually getting people, reaching out to people, and getting their stories. It's a lot of work that I think other normal data visualization projects, where we have the data readily available, we don't really face that. How long was the total project end to end? Like how long did it take you to complete?
Hmm. So the whole project was 3 months. And yes, the data collection part was important for me because um, going back to this gap that I was telling you earlier, that I didn't think there was the qualitative data that I needed for this project. I thought, okay, then I'm going to collect this data myself. And it was definitely a challenge. Also, I wanted to be um, very ethical in how I approach my interviews. I wanted to gather as much information as possible, but at the same time, I didn't want to gather information that was unnecessary or that I wouldn't use. And when I started doing the interviews, I didn't know how the visualization would look like. um, so that was difficult. I would, if I would do a similar project again, I think I would try to envision how the visualization would look like, because in that way you can do the data collection in a way that you specifically tackle that. But yeah, I don't know if I answered your question, or there was something else.
Oh yeah, yeah. Actually, your responses made me think if there's any other advice you have, you know, that you learned from this experience that you would give to others on, any like your top three tips on, how people can approach this project, learn from your mistakes, but also your positive experiences from your project, so that when they do their work, they're also able to have success with it.
Hmm. Yeah, so I think it's very important to be, again, mindful of the people you're representing. Um, for me, I was earlier talking about the feedback that I got, and I mainly referred to feedback from people who read the story.
Mm.
But before officially publishing it, I shared each story with the 8 participants. And it was a challenge because at first I did the story in English, and I had to translate it into Spanish for them, which is also the language in which I led the interviews. um, and I got some very good feedback from some of the participants, saying that they were very happy with how they were being represented, that they thought that the visualization looked cool, and that I had managed to summarize all the important information in their stories. And when I got that feedback, I thought it was like, I thought I was done. Like, this is the best feedback I could have gotten. Um, and yeah, and that was great. So I would say definitely honoring the people who you are representing. And because, and I can give you an example about this. One of the early ideas that I had for this project of how to visualize these trajectories was doing a line chart. And of course, like, we tend to associate a lot time with lines. And so I said, okay, I can do like a line chart where a 45-degree angle, a positive correlation line, would represent a timely trajectory. And then I can overlay the other trajectories and whatnot. And then I thought to myself, and I also discussed this with colleagues, and I thought to myself, this is promoting exactly what I don't want with this project,
Mm.
which is comparison between the trajectories, which is showing that there's an ideal path in education and not showing that there's diversity and many different ways in which this can go. Um, so I think data visualization is such a powerful tool, but it's important for us as practitioners to acknowledge that responsibility we have when we are visualizing any kind of data, and more so in this kind of anthropographic data visualization, showing human stories. So yeah, acknowledging the responsibility we have in our hands.
Mm. Yeah, that's a really good point that you bring up, and thank you for sharing that with us. I know as like data practitioners, sometimes in our role, it's not required of us to work with policymakers or other organizations that are working on social change. But do you have any, like, I don't know if you worked with anyone for this project, and if you did, if you have any tips for people who may work on similar projects?
Hmm. Yes, so at the beginning, I thought of, for the case recruitment particularly, I thought of maybe collaborating with an organization. And I asked a former coworker who was an education specialist what she thought. Like, could I collaborate with an organization for this? And in this case, she told me, do it on your own, because if you do it with an organization, you will be tied to the organization's times, and that's gonna be more time consuming for you. um, but definitely, I think that working with organizations can be a great way. I don't think this is exploded so much by certain organizations, data visualization. So I think it's definitely something that can be explored more, or even these kinds of stories, using them as means for advocacy, for policymaking, and even for fundraising, for example.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. Um, do you have any other advice that you want to give to people who do want to start using or creating data visualization for advocacy and social change?
Mm. Um, I think that there is a lot to be said and to be done. Sometimes it can be hard to get the data that we want, or the data that we would want there to be. But I think this practice um, of getting personal stories, and visualizing them can be an interesting one. Actually, yesterday I was at an event, at a meeting that had to do with data feminism. And data feminism was one of the theories I used to develop this project. And the third principle of data feminism talks about embodiment and emotion, and it is precisely about deeming these lived experiences as valuable data. So I think that normally we have this idea of what data is, what data looks like, what a data set looks like. We have this very fixed idea in our heads.
Mhm.
But this kind of like definition, but I think that allowing these lived experiences to also be valuable data sources is a great practice, and it's more grounded, more rooted, maybe, than doing a massive data collection, and that's super costly also for some organizations. So I think that telling these kinds of stories and seeing how valuable they are is great.
Yeah, yeah, that's you. This is such a good point that you've made, and I think, I mean, you mentioned this earlier too about how you found that this was missing in the data that you could access. Some people might actually stop there and just be like, this is the data I could access, this is the data I'm going to use, and create their visuals and stories from there. But taking that extra step of saying, well, this is what's missing. Let me go try to find it. Um, and when I asked you how long it took you, I was honestly expecting like something like a year, but you like did it in 3 months, which is really impressive. I know not everyone can complete a project like this in 3 months, but it's just showing that it is possible and feasible to do, especially if you're able. Now that we are living in this day and age with access to internet and social media, we're able to connect with people a lot faster than we did before. We don't necessarily have to be on the ground and knocking on doors sometimes to get these stories. So it's really inspiring and impressive that you were able to accomplish this in this short of a time, and that you actually stopped and asked yourself, like, this is missing. I can't find this data. Let me go find it.
Yeah, definitely. And also, I did the data collection. I was based in the UK, and I did the data collection with people from Uruguay from a distance. So it's like you were saying, it's not even knocking on people's doors. It had its challenges doing field work from a distance, but it is possible.
Yeah, yeah, that's awesome. We have a listener here, Omar Ali, who's asking, what tools do you recommend for creating impactful data visuals? Maybe you can share the ones that you use often.
Yeah, sure. I can share the ones that I use for this project. Of course, there are many, many others. So, for the more classic data visualizations, I used Flourish and Data Wrapper because they were also tools. So, I developed the whole site using a platform called Shorthand, which was also very handy for the storytelling feature. And it had a third party embed feature with Flourish and with Data Wrapper. So that was useful for me for this project. And then the anthropographic or personal data visualizations, I developed them on Illustrator. But they were very easy to make because if you look at them, they're essentially lines. So it could be done maybe in other tools, but I feel comfortable using Adobe Illustrator. And also sketching on pen and paper, like the first idea I got, I sketched it using highlighters of different colors. So that's always good for getting the idea that's in your mind to something more tangible.
Awesome. While you were talking, I was trying to pull up a link to screen share for those who are watching this live stream, but I'm not able to get the link. But if you have it handy, feel free to share your screen, or I can put in the link in the show notes for those who are
Yeah,
rewatching the replay. Yeah.
of the site, you mean, of the Patsy in
Yeah.
Education?
Yeah.
Sure, I can put it in the notes afterwards.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, I actually didn't even know that know about shorthand, but it's cool that I think I got it pulled up. Um, but let's see if it loads. Okay, it's having some issues with loading on my screen. No, I see it. Okay, let me try to see if I can share my screen for those who want to see this because I think it's really cool. Um, I
Sure.
thought, let's see. Oh, there you go. Okay, there.
Oh yeah, there it is.
Yeah, so I have it in English, I think, and oops, there you go. Okay,
Yes, it's also available in Spanish.
very cool. So there's a toggle at the top to switch between Spanish and English, and as you scroll down, you see these lines appear. Very cool. So did you need any like strong technical skills to be able to create this?
Not really, to be honest. I essentially did these visualizations are images that I used as the background of the
Oh,
of that section. And I designed those images using Adobe Illustrator. So what you're seeing is a black rectangle with three lines on the left.
oh,
That's
very
the image
cool.
that I designed. And then it's also responsive. So if you see it on mobile, it'll be, the lines will be in the middle, and you'll have the text, the storytelling on the center. um, so yeah, it was essentially doing these different images and making sure that the story that was happening on the right side made sense with how the images were changing in the background.
Very
And these are
cool.
the visualizations of the 8 different stories of the 8 different people that I interviewed, and how each educational trajectory looks different.
That's really cool. Very impressive. I'll share the link. I'll drop the link in the comments for the LinkedIn Live, as well as the show notes for those who are watching it or listening to it on Spotify or whatever podcast player. But yeah, this is really cool. I know like another popular tool is D3 for scrolly telling effect, but I know there's like that technical learning curve with D3 that not everyone is able to spend time to learn. So, yeah, so this is shorthand that we were looking at. And I'll also put in the show notes the list of other tools that you recommended and that you use. Talking about scrolly telling, I know this was like a popular trend, still is. Are there any other trends in data storytelling that you are excited about that people are doing this year or in the future?
Hmm. Um, I wouldn't say it's exactly a trend, but I think that at least for me, I got more acquainted with this anthropographic or personal data visualizations in 2024. So I think that um, at least this is more of a personal opinion, but I would love to see more of this, because I know that some data based pieces use personal testimonies sometimes as quotes or as audio snippets, but I would love for there to be more data visualizations that actually represent these people. I think it's a really interesting way to see it. So, yeah, not exactly a trend, but I would love to see more of that.
Yeah, that'll be really interesting to see. Um, Finally, before we wrap up this show, for those who are interested in maybe getting in touch with you or looking at your portfolio, where can they do that?
Yeah, so I am working as a data journalist for the European Correspondent. So most of my visualization work goes there. If you go to the European Correspondent's website, I have a personal page where you can see all my data visualization work there. It's like a portfolio, but for my work in the European Correspondent. And if you want to get in touch with me, I'm on LinkedIn. I am as Paula Lago. I am on X and on Blue Sky also. So feel free to reach out.
Awesome. I'll link all of these socials and websites that she mentioned in the show notes. One last question from a listener. Again, it's from Omar, who's asking, are there any good books that you recommend for gathering data in the field? Because in the country that they're from, the young people are largely not online.
Hmm, that's interesting. Um, I used a book that I can tell you, Hannah, what it was called afterwards. That um, it was about interviews and more on how you can approach these interviews. um, I think maybe if people are not so accessible online, you can reach out to organizations. There are always NGOs that are working with younger people, so you can reach out to them. And maybe there's a shared interest between your project and the organization's mission, and you can create something together, and that way you can reach that target audience.
Yeah, great advice. And I will follow up with that link or that name of the
Yeah.
book, and I'll put it in the show notes as well. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for listening. And thank you so much, Paula, for taking the time this afternoon to talk to us about this and the work that you're doing. I hope it inspires others to also participate and do projects like this. As you mentioned, you're excited to see more anthropographic data visualizations, and hopefully we can see that happen in our community. Um, yeah, thank you so much, everyone, and have a great